Oh, hi, I'm David with EV World News. We're talking about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. I'm here today with our resident engineer, Mike Herzog. And also today we have a special guest, Arcady Sosinov. I hope I'm saying that right, with Tritium. Pleasure to have you here, Arcady. How's it
Thanks,
going
David.
today?
You did say it right. It's going well. I'm excited to be on the podcast and tell you more.
No, that's great. That's great. You're new to Tritium, right?
Yeah, relatively new. I've been in this role for almost 6 months now. And while I'm new to Tritium, I'm not new to the industry. I've spent the last 12 years in EV charging infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
Before Tritium, back in late 2013, early 2014, I founded a company called Freewire. And
Hmm.
Freewire was developing battery integrated ultra fast chargers. So chargers with integrated energy storage to
Nice.
uh, limit the impact of electric vehicle fast charging on the grid. That company I ran as CEO for the better part of 10 years.
Hmm.
And we deployed close to 1,500 ultra fast chargers across primarily North America. We did a little bit of work in Europe as well, but primarily North America. Um, and then most recently, I joined Tritium, and now this is a global organization. Right? We have a staff of 300 engineering in Australia. We have our production facility in Tennessee. We have our largest market is actually the UK, so we have a pretty large service and sales organization out there. And so, if I wanted to, I could be working 24/7, David, which is a little bit different. Um, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it.
No, I can get where that gets weird when you're having to deal with a lot of different time zones. I've spent a lot of different parts of my life where I've been dealing with either dealing with people 8 hours one way or 8 hours the other way. You know, trying to stay in communication regularly on the phone. Um, and at the moment, I stay in regular communication with people in India, and they're oddly 10 and a half hours different than where we're at. So it it makes things challenging sometimes trying to get the um, the message through. So, anyways, so is FreeWire still operating?
Yes, but in a limited capacity. So I sold the company in early 2024, and
Okay.
um, that company we significantly downscaled the company. So I think there's about 60 or 70 people left in the organization. They're now a subsidiary of a larger company in the fleet segment, and they're still developing next generation, again, battery integrated ultra fast chargers, specifically designed for the fleet sector. I think they're going to come out with a product relatively soon. But we faced the same challenges at Freewire that a lot of the folks in the industry faced, which is we had a boom cycle in 2020, 2021, and that was spurred on by both investment activity and announcements by the federal government, by the Biden administration at the time, of large scale funding under NEVI. That was plus
Hmm.
the Inflation Reduction Act. That was a $7.5 billion of total funding that was meant to flow into the sector, which never actually did.
I'm aware,
Yeah,
painfully aware.
yeah. And I think a lot of companies, Tritium included, actually ramped up to meet the public statements that were being made by the administration. And so we built a large manufacturing facility in Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, in a town called Lebanon. And at the time that it was built, which was about 2 years ago, it was the largest manufacturing facility for DC fast charging equipment globally. It may still be. I'm not really keeping track because largest isn't necessarily something you want to be proud of these days, but it is a very large facility. It does have very high output potential. So the company built up this large manufacturing facility, filled it with capital equipment, material handling equipment, all of the tools and equipment on the line that you would expect, and built up pretty significant raw materials inventory because Tritium was one of the largest sub-awardees under the NEVI program.
Oh no.
So all of these site owners who bid into those NEVI projects and who
Hmm.
were given verbal indications of an award, they, in many cases, had chosen Tritium as the hardware vendor for their
Hmm.
equipment. And so we were given very clear indication, and the federal government in our mind was a credible counterparty. We were given a indication that all of this commercial activity is going to come down the pipeline very, very, very soon. And so the company built up a lot of raw materials inventory from our supply chain. And unfortunately, one by one, we started getting word from those site hosts that projects were not moving forward or were being delayed. Now, in the benefit of hindsight, we know what actually happened. None of that money and eventually hit the street. Very, very small portion. Very, very, very small, as you know.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
but
It seems like Nevi was poorly written. Like the rules of how to obtain the funds were made with such difficult degree, all the hoops you had to go through to get it done. I mean, Mike, as an engineer, that's kind of his space, and it just seems like it was, you
We
know,
did. We specifically looked at applying for some of them, and with rural locations and where it was at, and it was so slow. The process and everything like that. Unfortunately, I think if we would have got the ball rolling a couple of years ago, when that funding first came out, maybe there was still a lifeline out of it. But instead, it kind of became the poster child of, we allocated all of this funding for $7.5 billion for two chargers, or whatever their tagline was. So
yeah,
it's been tough for sure.
yeah, and there
yeah,
was some
from a
information that
political perspective, I think it was 8 chargers, and it was just crazy because I think there's thousands that were set up to
Yes.
eventually be in by like 27 and all that. But yeah, I mean, the Nevi legislation was just terrible.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the money being hard to capture. If
Hmm.
there's rules set at the federal level and they're difficult rules, that's okay because it's a lot of money at stake. I'm fine with meeting those hurdles. But it's when you go to each individual state, and each individual state, 50 states, set their own version of hard and
Oh,
difficult hurdles. That's what makes it very difficult on the industry as a whole. So you're going to different sites in different states and having to do different things every single time. But on top of that, I mean, the tagline, as we know, is not true. $7.5 billion was not sent out. Nowhere near that amount was sent out. In fact, most of the money is now still sitting with the federal government and is never going to get allocated, in my opinion. So a lot of companies in this space ended up scaling up um, their production activities or supply chain activities to try to meet that goal. And we're caught flat-footed, Tritium being one of them.
mhm.
Were
Now,
you able to redirect any of that at all to more international markets than stateside, or is it still kind of figuring out what that means with the additional ramp up capability you have?
Well, Tritium specifically was hit very hard
Okay.
by that impact, right? Um, and we ended up filing for what's called voluntary administration, which meant that we went through I'd say a lightweight bankruptcy process. It's the best way to explain it to those that are not in this every single day. And through that, we were able to shed our liabilities, and the company's assets were sold to a larger company, actually an Indian company. David, you mentioned that earlier.
yeah, Exicomm.
That's right, Exicomm, which is a company that is a publicly traded company in India, specifically focuses on the telecom sector. So setting up power conversion technologies, batteries for telco. And as we all know, telecom in India has really boomed over the last couple of decades and
Mhm.
it's still booming. So it's a company that entered the EV charging market in India specifically and has seen some incredible success. They have 60% market share of uh, home charging, residential charging, and about a 25% market share of public charging, which is mostly DC charging in India. And they wanted to expand globally, and Tritium became available as a play to do that. So technically speaking, the company that I'm running today as the CEO is not the same company that was there in the past, but it's got all the same assets, uh,
Mhm.
many of the same employees, although I've had to rebuild that in many ways. I've hired just over 100 people, 120 people actually, since I
Oh,
joined here as CEO. We're up to about 300 now. But again, there's no sort of painting a great light around this. The company was caught flat-footed trying to scale up to the goals that were set, and we were forced with a pretty terrible situation. But now we're back. We have new products that we've continued to develop even through that process. We are launching new products to market. We just announced our Triflex product, and we're producing and selling products into the market today. Just as a fun fact, between January 1st and today, which is the end of May, as of the time of this recording, we've deployed and commissioned 500 new chargers in the field with customers. So
Nice.
It's a good clip. It's a good clip.
So I understand you've got this new charging pod. It uses a fairly high amount of electricity. You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, we announced our Triflex product just about 3 weeks ago now. And that is looking at distributed charging in an entirely new light. And what do I mean by distributed charging? I mean, there's really two types of technologies when you look at ultra fast charging. There's a standalone system. It looks effectively like a box, a large fridge, and it has all of the power electronics and all of the boards and components inside of it. And you feed heavy utility infrastructure to that box, and that's what charges your vehicles. That's a standalone system. That's great for small sites. When we talk about convenience stores, gas stations, you want that all-in-one system, but it really is limited when you start to scale up your site. When you're thinking about charging 8 vehicles at a time, or in some cases, 24 vehicles, 32, 64 vehicles at a time on a given site, you can think about the scenarios in which this would happen. That all-in-one technology, it becomes incredibly cost prohibitive and creates a pretty significant impact on the grid, because each one of those units would need to pull high power individually from the grid. And so when you look at large charging sites, you want to go to a distributed architecture. And distributed means you have a central power converter, potentially paired with a central battery in some cases, not in all cases, but potentially paired, sitting next to your utility infrastructure. And then each one of the dispensers that you as a user would drive up to is just that. It's a dispenser. It's a cable. It's a credit card reader. It's a screen to give you a nice UI. But it doesn't have any of the power electronics and power conversion equipment inside of it. And that's exactly how the Tesla supercharger network works today. People always are amazed by how small that Tesla supercharging post is. It has that nice hole in the middle of it to give it a nice silhouette. There's nothing inside of it. It's just a cable management system. It doesn't even have a screen on it in most cases. It certainly doesn't have a credit card reader. It is just a cable sitting on a post. All of the actual electronics, the power conversion, that happens in a large box, sometimes 50 feet, sometimes 100 feet away from that dispenser. Distributed architecture like that is very good when you have a mix of different vehicles coming to sites at different times, so that not every one post needs to provide high power at the same time. Yeah, I mean, you all know we've been in the space for a decade or more now between us, and if everybody showed up to a Tesla supercharger site at the same time, speeds decrease.
Right.
And that's okay, because you're banking on the fact that not everyone shows up at the same time, and not every vehicle requests high power at the same time. And so this is where distributed architecture really plays. In the past, distributed architecture was typically limited to, let's call it 8 charging posts per power cabinet. We've developed a new architecture. It's a combination of what we call oversubscription and matrix switching. Those are technical terms. I'm happy to go into it if you think your readers are interested. But the long and the short is that we can hook up 32 dispensers and charge 64 vehicles simultaneously on one power cabinet. And that allows you to really configure the site for your needs. If you're a fleet operator, you have a choice to make. Are all my vehicles coming back to the yard at the same time? In which case I need high peak output. Or are my vehicles coming back at staggered times throughout the day? In which case I don't need that high peak, but I need that high throughput or high breadth of charging. And our architecture allows you to make that choice that's best for your site. So that's what the Triflex does. It is a up to 1.6 megawatt power cabinet, feeding up to 32 dispensers, charging up to 64 vehicles at a time. Any one of those vehicles can charge at up to 640 kilowatts.
Oh, are there any cars that can take that?
No, not today, but
Okay.
future proof. But if all vehicles show up at the same time, then the cars are not going to get 640 kilowatts each.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It can go as low as 50 kilowatts per car when you spread it out across that large site with the maximum throughput capabilities. So again, giving you that ultimate flexibility. And because we do it this way, our cost per charging port or per parking spot, if you want to look at it that way, is by far the lowest in the industry. And it gives you the ultimate configuration.
Yeah, that's I was looking at that, and I assume you also have generally a very large battery pack if you were going to have a 1.6 megawatt throughput.
A battery, you can plug a battery pack directly on the DC bus. So this is another really interesting point here that I want to make about distributed architecture versus all-in-one architecture. With an all-in-one system, the big box that you might go and plug into, you're running three-phase AC conduit, copper, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the utility transformer or from the switch gear all the way out to your parking spot. Mike knows this. He's done this countless times, right? That's pretty expensive conduit, right? With DC or distributed architecture, your power cabinet is sitting next to your switchgear. It's sitting next to your transformer. And so the AC cabling, that run is very short, only a few feet in some cases, and likely very inexpensive. What you then run to the dispenser is aluminum DC conduit. The cabling is much smaller, it's less thick, it's aluminum, and so your costs are tens of thousands of dollars cheaper by using that aluminum conduit versus using that copper three-phase thicker conduit. And so you're just getting a lot of benefits and advantages on the installation side. Now, because of that DC bus running throughout the whole site, right? You have DC cabling running throughout the whole site. You can put a battery down anywhere on the site, and you can feed it directly into that DC bus. You don't need an inverter next to the battery to convert from AC to DC and then DC back to AC. You just plug in a battery directly into the DC bus. As long as your battery can output 950 volts DC, that DC bus will take it and use it across all of your dispensers, across all of your chargers, and the grid never sees the difference. You never have to actually go back to the grid and get an interconnection request or so forth. So much lower cost of interconnecting a battery to the system. We don't provide the battery, right? Because our product is so configurable, to your earlier point, David, that our site hosts, typically project developers in some cases, they're speccing out their own battery. They're going to Tesla getting a mega pack. They're going to Fluence getting one of their batteries. They're speccing that battery size and supplier for what they need. But then we give you the ability to just connect it very easily into the system. That's where we play.
Nice. So how does this affect like the reliability of your network? This is one of the big things that's ongoing with EV charging infrastructure is what kind of uptime do the chargers have if it's just one system? Because the Tesla system is famous for being 98, 99% uptime at their charging, whereas the rest of the industry seems to be at like 78%.
Yeah.
How is this affecting uptimes?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to answer this question. So the reason that Tesla advertises a 99.5% uptime is because of how they measure uptime. One, they measure a site as up if at least half of the chargers on that site are working. Okay. So if 50% of the chargers on an individual site are down, they still consider that as 100% uptime. And when you build a big site like Tesla, that's an advantage, right? So that's why you can state very high uptime numbers. Their uptime, when you look at it on an individual charger basis, is not all that better than the industry, but they have very big sites. So when a charger is down, just move to the next one, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing. It's like 1 in 5 people, when they go to try to charge on a non-Tesla charger, tend to not actually be able to charge their car at
Yeah.
that location.
Yeah.
And so you're just saying that if at Tesla, if that occurred, they just moved to the next power jack, and they're going.
It's one of many reasons. So
Yeah.
one, it's typically with third-party charging sites, not Tesla.
Mhm.
You have a couple of chargers, 4 chargers, maybe. Sometimes with Electrify America, you'll see 6 chargers. Those are relatively small sites compared to Tesla. So when something goes down on that site, when a charger or 2 or 3 go down on the site, you feel the impact, right? You see a line that starts to form. Consumers get really frustrated. And so that's one problem. Build bigger sites, you have less reliability concerns. That's a bit of where our technology allows an operator to go. 2, Tesla has famously controlled the interoperability with the vehicle. And they don't have any credit card reader functionality or any screen. The 3 biggest failure modes in charging today are interoperability with vehicles, credit card readers, and screens. And Tesla decided to just eliminate all of it. It's brilliant.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
Cool. Yeah.
complaining. That's a smart move. Now they are being pushed in some of these public funding situations to actually put credit card readers. Mike,
I mean, that was going back to the NEVI plan. That was criteria on that.
Yeah.
You have to be able to take a credit card.
Yep. But that's a huge part of the failure and why people can't get a successful charge. So that they increase reliability even more so by eliminating those 3, what I'd say, high failure rate components. Right. That's another important thing to note here. And that the last piece is then how do you measure uptime? It's not just when hardware fails, it's how fast you respond. In the world of engineering, you have something called a mean time between failure, MTBF. That's how long it takes a component to fail on average. And then you have something called mean time to repair, MTTR. How long does it take you to then go out to site and repair that component? What I would argue is Tesla's mean time between failure and components is no different than anybody else's mean time between failure and components. But they have a robust service network. People in vans with parts that go out to sites. Famously, you might have heard about this recently. In my backyard in Massachusetts, a site was vandalized, burned to the ground.
Right.
Within 1 week, Tesla had that site back up and running, replaced all the chargers. That is incredible service. And it is a huge contributor to why the uptime and reliability of the Tesla supercharger network feels as great as it does. And it does feel great. It does feel great. In the world of third-party charging operators, and you all know who they are, right? Their names are on the equipment. Sometimes they're retail or sometimes they're pure play charging operators. That service is not as fast today, right? So you have this layered component of reliability. You have both the interoperability of vehicles. You have these components, credit card readers and screens that tend to fail. You have the speed of service, and then you have large sites that make it so that there's always a charger working somewhere on the site. You combine that, and anybody can have as high reliability and uptime as Tesla. It's just that that's very rare in the industry today.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good reasoning. So you mentioned earlier about how NEVI was kind of a problem. Do you think that was part of why Tritium became insolvent previously?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
So, and how'd that affect the plant in Tennessee?
So the plant in Tennessee, we downscaled in terms of headcount dramatically. At one point, that factory floor had 400 production technicians building product. On top of the indirect labor in the factory. I mean, of course, we had supply chain people, quality people, and so forth. But specifically production technicians, people on the floor building the product, we had about 400. Today, we have about 80.
Oof.
Right? So there's the direct impact. I'm just being completely transparent and honest with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up scaling back that production labor. We kept the factory, we kept all the tools, we kept all the equipment, but now we have to grow a little bit more reasonably, right? I'm not going to go from 80 to 400 overnight again, right? My plan by the end of this year is to get to about 150 people on that line as demand is starting to scale up again. But it's just not going to be the same curve, that S curve as as before. But we're noticing something happen in the industry that you might be noticing as well. For the better part of 18 months, maybe 24, but I'd say 18 months for certain, this industry was at a standstill. People weren't really buying charging infrastructure. People weren't installing it at any great scale. People were nervous about what would happen with NEVI funding and IRA and public dollars. People were nervous that EV adoption would just fall off a cliff, that, oh no, here we go again. EVs 2.0, nobody wants them. Now the data has come out quarter after quarter and year after year. EV adoption continues to rise. Last year, 20% of all new vehicles sold globally were electric. This year, it's forecast to be 25. 1 in 4 vehicles sold this year are all electric.
Right.
Yep.
Sometimes you feel that driving along the road. You see a lot of Teslas and Rivians, but a lot of people don't see that yet. They don't.
Well, California, it's already the 1 in 4.
Right.
I mean, it's already there. It's just it's just, that's a difference though between the West Coast and the rest of the country. We live in Nebraska, okay, and we don't have a lot of EVs here, but we notice them. It's like we see them. I was commenting, sometimes we're off there. It's like, hey, I saw that one of those new Chargers going down the road that was electric, or I saw another Volkswagen ID Buzz. I think I've seen 3 different colors roaming around Omaha so far, and I think the Volkswagen dealership claims they've sold about a dozen. Okay, so but Omaha's not a big city by U.S. standards. I think we're ranked like number 40th biggest city or something like that. And there's just not a lot of population here. But you go out to the West Coast, or you go somewhere and you get out at an airport and you call an Uber, it's always a Tesla, and it's so much more economical. It just seems like it's regional
really
issues.
Interesting is what you're saying is things we've been talking about for a while, and we try to avoid politics, because that's a thorny mess on everything. But one of the things we had talked about was EV infrastructure investment, and so many people, and Tritium's a perfect example of this, invested in that for the future and scaled up and retooled and are building factories and are doing this and creating real jobs and everything. So one of the things David and I comes up almost every show is like, boy, it's difficult to completely pull the rug out nationally from federal funding, because it's truly people have invested into it. And it's like what you just commented there at the end. What we continue to see is that this is David's phrasing, and I've adopted it too, but like, when it comes to electric vehicles, the United States isn't the major leagues. China is the major leagues. I mean, we are a minor league, and they are truly driving that market right now and what it looks like. And what you're saying is, even with a pullback, or I don't want to say a clawback because it hasn't been clawed back, but a pullback of those funding mechanisms, like, yeah, the market's still growing. It's still getting bigger. There are more vehicles. There are more of all these things coming out. I just think hearing this come up about the Tritium story is just a really interesting example of, here's a real, you went from 400 employees to 80 employees because this got pulled back. Is that number going to show up in any government statistic related to this program and what it was going to create and the NEVI? No, but it's tangible, and it was real investment in a Tennessee community about what was going to happen. And now this is the trickle down result of that.
So the big winner in the IRA was Georgia. Okay, Georgia's got like 90,000 jobs in manufacturing as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, the rest of the country, I mean, 90% of all the money that was doled out for manufacturing from that went to Republican states, and their congressmen and senators all voted against the act. And nobody had any clue that they were going to get all of these jobs. But Georgia in particular has gotten like, I think like 70+% of all of that growth has been to one state. And it's been phenomenal for them. And you just don't want to see that piece fall apart. Now, in terms of like government policy and regulation, is there anything you think could really help fuel reliable? Because here's an issue. We need chargers everywhere, right? We live in Nebraska. If you put a charger out on I-80 somewhere in the state, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of use out of it. Okay. Whereas, you put it somewhere in downtown Omaha, it probably gets used a fair amount, right? And so that was kind of the idea of NEVI, was to do those hard to get somebody to invest in places to make this work. I mean, what do you think we need to see in terms of legislation to be able to help things come out?
So I'm going to say something that I think my colleagues in this industry are not going to agree with me with, but I'm just going to say it anyways. I don't think we need any incentives. I think the news today that the House committee passed the big beautiful bill, as we call it, right? And I'm not going to comment on what's in the bill, except for it repeals the $7,500 EV tax credit. Fine, don't need it, don't want it. It's proven now that consumers prefer electric vehicles in the numbers at which they're buying those electric vehicles. And when you survey people as to what their next vehicle will likely be, more than half of people say that their next vehicle will likely be electric.
Correct.
So we don't need that tax credit. What I do think is a little bit of a rub is the $250 bill on EVs and hybrid electric vehicles to make up for the gas tax. That's a little bit of a rub, but listen, it's not going to change things dramatically one way or the other. So no incentives, forget NEVI, forget IRA, it's gone. No EV tax credit, it's gone. Let free market play out. What you do have to end up doing is reduce the red tape and bureaucracy around installation, interconnection, permitting of these stations. It, in California, easily will take a year to install and interconnect a new EV charging site. In other states, it's probably a little bit faster, 6 to 9 months, but it's just too long. It's just too long, and the bureaucracy and the red tape are holding up customers dramatically. And so, a legislation to fast track, at least, let it get through the permitting process within 30 days. At least the permitting process within 30 days, fast track it, I think would be the biggest boom for this industry yet.
Yeah, we had somebody that is just doing local chargers in Colorado, and he came on and he had to start out with level 2 chargers because he couldn't get enough juice, couldn't get a transformer installed. What did he say? It took almost 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it was equipment. I mean, they had an equipment lead time for the larger transformer for the supercharger that they were being quoted.
Yeah, and just stupid.
To that point, I don't think we need an investment in the EV charging infrastructure specifically. What we need investment in this country is utility equipment. Again, to your point, Mike, transformers, switch gear, distribution panels, all of meters, right? All of that equipment is very difficult to get, especially on the high power side. When you're talking about a megawatt or 2 megawatts, or God forbid, 5 megawatts plus, very, very difficult to get. If we can somehow fast track getting those into the country, then I think that ends up really benefiting our industry and just benefiting the country as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things is we all know, we hear people say, oh, if everybody switched to EVs, there's not enough power or whatever. And it's just like, well, have you heard about AI? And it's, AI is sucking up so much more electricity than electric vehicles will ever use. It's just nuts to see, and it's such a challenge to get all of the electricity for the grid. When I saw the thing and I saw the 1.6 megawatts, it's like, oh, well, this is going to be interesting. I'm wondering what kind of infrastructure somebody's going to have to run to get that. Now, when you're looking, you're selling this equipment to people who are operating locally, right?
Right.
And so it's on them to figure out how to get that 1.6 megawatts, in their area, and that's just been one of the big challenges that we've seen. Mike was part of when Amazon came to Nebraska, and they have a few hundred Rivian vans, and of course, they got just rows and rows of chargers for those things. And man, if they're all charging at the same time, they're sucking a lot of juice in that part of the Omaha
And
market.
they were, obviously it's Amazon, so they were super early, but they had it built in their site plan, and it was a fun conversation because sometime down the road, don't worry about it. Then a week later, it was like, yeah, we're going to put those in on day one, because that's just the way things are going now. But yeah, they had very good forethought. We saw it a lot and still see it in planning areas, parking garages, places like that where it's that's a lot of potential vehicles, and how do you provision for that, if everybody's going to be there? We'd always push back and say, well, if there's 100 electric vehicles in there, are you concerned about the weight on that floor, let alone the power capacity and what those things might be? But yeah, it's unexpected places where you thought an area was, well, like a grocery store. Walmart's about a megawatt, when you throw it all together. Well, take 10 parking places, that's a megawatt in their parking lot. Again, you just doubled the electrical footprint of a Walmart, just like that. So it's just, yeah, it's what you guys are saying. It's limited, and in a lot of these areas, it's been built out for many, many years. And to try to go back and shoehorn in more capacity is tough.
And so what happens when you ask for a megawatt plus to a certain site from a utility? And I'd say this is broadly true across most utilities. You get into that other process, right? We're not talking about the expedited process. We're talking, oh, you're asking for a megawatt plus. We're going to put you through this process. And this process usually comes with a load study. And they go out to site and they understand, what is my capacity on these substations? By the way, they don't know that information. You would think a utility knows the capacity on a substation and how much is being used on average. They don't really know. We have some pretty antiquated utility infrastructure and data out there. And so they get to do a load study that takes a month or more. And before they can even tell you whether it's possible to build on that site, you as a commercial entity probably already moved on. Right? This is the frustrating part, and why there's just this lag that happens. And it goes back to NEVI. When projects are awarded and you can start spending money, you're talking about a year or two before that project goes live. And so even looking back at the way the program's designed, you knew from the outset that we would not feel the impact of those NEVI dollars. The next administration would, or we would feel that over the next 5 years, but not immediately.
Yeah, it's 100%, and it's a changing dynamic in the industry where before, to get a megawatt of load, that's significant construction. Like, you are building a large building, you are doing a lot of investment in your infrastructure and the building and everything like that. So yeah, we picked this building for a lot of reasons. Okay, the power's not quite there. Yeah, 2 years. This building's not going to be up for years.
Right.
Running a little bit of extra cable is just incrementally more than the cost of a building. But what's happening now in all of these situations, like, we can put this up next month, if you give us the go ahead and put it up there, and we're ready to start using it right away. And for our project, the addition of an extra 100 feet of cable actually might make a difference. I mean, that is not just an incremental cost on a $10 million building. Now it's all of a sudden an incremental cost on a $100,000 charging station project, $250,000. And it's, okay, this isn't viable anymore, where it's gone. So it's just been I'm sticking up for the utility guys over here because I was a utility guy forever, but it's just been a dynamically changing expectation on how quickly these giant loads materialize and what they have to do.
Indeed.
So if I'm in the market for buying charging infrastructure, either for my fleet or I want to own a large, site that I'm going to rent out to make money. I mean, what kind of warning signs should I be looking for when I'm trying to evaluate, charging infrastructure companies and products?
Well, let's say from a product side of things, don't get don't buy into the horsepower wars of charging.
Okay.
And what I mean by that, remember, I guess we're all car guys. You're on an EV podcast, so you
Mm-hmm.
have to be a car guy. If you remember back in the day, we had muscle cars, 4, 5, 600. The Demon came out, 700 horsepower. The Hellcat, 1,000. I mean, we lived through those horsepower wars. The Germans
Right.
lived through the horsepower wars. You were both, I believe, born in Germany. The Germans lived through the horsepower wars with the M5s and the E63 AMG
Mm-hmm.
Mercedes. You remember those days?
Yes.
So little throwback. We just lived through the horsepower wars in charging, where it started out with 50 kilowatt fast charging. Then it had to be 150. Then it had to be 350. Now it has to be 400. Now it has to be a megawatt plus to charge these semis. Don't buy into the horsepower wars. You need to think about what your actual consumer needs on your site. If you have a grocery store, that person's going to be there for 30 minutes. They do not need 400 kilowatt charging. They don't need it, guys. And because they're going to be incentivized to stay out in the parking lot. If their vehicle can charge in 15 minutes or get to 80% in 15 minutes, then they're going to stay on the parking lot instead of going into the store because they're going to be worried about giving that spot to the next person. Right? So design your site for what you actually want that consumer experience to be. If you're on a rest stop on a highway, okay, fine. Big power is what you need. If you're a grocery store, a gas station, inner city, if you're servicing an Uber fleet, for example, near an airport where they're going to have some wait times before they pick up their next customer, you're talking about a completely different architecture and different infrastructure. And so I'd say spec your site for what you need rather than the biggest possible number on the machine, because that big number on the machine is going to cost you a lot of money. Okay. And how to look at charging infrastructure providers. Well, I'd have to get political here for just a second because I think it does matter today. There are really American providers of charging infrastructure, European providers of charging infrastructure, and then typically Chinese providers of charging infrastructure. We have, as an industry, typically been okay with bringing in Chinese products. That's changing pretty quickly and pretty dramatically. Just yesterday, 2 U.S. senators filed a brief with the Select Committee on China to try to ban one of the suppliers in this industry on national security concerns.
About the inverter, the hidden telecommunications equipment and electrical inverters.
Similar to that, right? We found recently, as a nation, we found that some of these Chinese inverters had independent cell communication so that somebody could switch off those inverters at any point in time, right? And these weren't in the engineering specifications right? So this is the real world. This is actually what's happening in EV charging infrastructure. That question is being raised now, and I'm not going to mention that company's name on this podcast, but you can easily look it up. And now there are national security concerns about it. So one, I'd say if you want to be sure, you pick European or American suppliers for charging infrastructure today. But then once you get into those suppliers, you have to look at what kind of customers are they selling to, right? If they're selling to customers like a BP or a Shell, big names in the industry, if they're selling to customers like a Walmart, right, a big name in the industry, then those large organizations have vetted these companies every which way to Sunday, right? And we've been vetted. Our biggest customer historically has been BP. We still sell to BP today. They still deploy our products in the field across globally, actually across the US, UK, and Australia, New Zealand. We sell to Shell. They're one of our biggest customers as well, and so forth. So there's just a lot of vetting process that happens. If you're working with potentially a new entrant into the market that hasn't sold to the big companies yet, they have a few steps to go. There's a few steps to go. So that's what I would look for. Avoid the horsepower wars. Look for American, European-made products. Buy American or European companies specifically, and then look at who else they're selling to.
Okay, that seems pretty fair. Is there anything else you'd like to, offer today? And
I mean, it's a point that I almost made probably about 20 minutes ago or so, is that there was a pause in this industry for about 18 months, charging
right.
infrastructure. And it's fine, it's healthy, that happens. But what's happened on the EV adoption side and consumers is people kept buying electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And so the big charge point operators in the country, they have slowed down their investment on their sites over the last 18 months. Now they have to scramble to catch up. Because if they didn't make investment in sites, securing sites with land leases, getting permits approved, getting utility interconnection requests approved, if they haven't done that over the last 18 months, they are way behind the 8 ball, right? They're far behind the curve. And now they're scrambling to catch up. And we're seeing that right now. So there's a little bit of a fervor that's happened in the industry, a little bit of a bubbling up of real demand. People coming to us and saying, can we get equipment as quickly? How quickly can we get equipment? Do you have stuff in inventory? And that's a good sign for the industry. That means there's like a recovery happening. So I'd say we weren't recovered compared to where this industry bubbled up to in 20 and 21, but it's certainly coming back and it's here to stay, which I'm happy about.
Didn't Germany drop all of their EV incentive programs in 22 or 23? I mean, they've really bounced back. I mean, they took an initial drop in EV sales and some other things initially, but then I know last year they experienced 20% higher growth than their best previous year.
Yeah.
And so, it's like it slowed down for a little bit when they dropped all the incentives, and then all of a sudden it just started really shooting up again. Yeah. And I think that's a pretty good example of, although there are some differences. See, I mean, Germany has a lot more air pollution, things like that, than what we have here. But I think one of the things that helps is when you're in a country, say like China, where they have lots of air pollution. I think the average person can see, but also, market economics for EVs. I mean, EVs are starting to drop to where they're cheaper than equivalent gas cars. And that wasn't the case even a year ago. That's only just starting to happen now in China. It's been like that for a couple of years. And it's just that those Chinese EVs aren't available in the US. And so you're seeing that faster adoption. I think market economics is going to make it just so much simpler. There's so many people who still think that an electric vehicle costs $100,000. That they just don't know that there's so many non-Tesla EVs just look like the company's other cars, right? They stopped making them look, initially when EVs first came, this is one of my complaints, they tried to make them as ugly as possible. Yeah. And it just seemed like it was like there was an incentive. It's like, let's just make something look really absurd. And, the car companies have stopped doing that, at least. And so that's, something that's really been positive. Anyways, I want to thank you for coming on today, Arcady. This has been really interesting to see, and it's good to see somebody doing something, coming up with fresh ideas in the EV space. I mean, only in the last year or so so you're not necessarily on the retail charging side, but have those retail charging companies actually been able to start making money? Mm-hmm. And they've started getting enough usage that on the whole, they're starting to finally see the light of day, because 2 years ago, that certainly wasn't the case. And, we're starting to see that there's enough adoption, enough usage that it's getting there. Anyways, folks, I want to thank everybody for watching today, and I'll be back. I've got a special guest coming in from Siemens tomorrow, and that'll be with our founder, Bill Moore. Anyways, otherwise, folks, everybody have a great day.